Everyone, my name is Brown. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Heidi Brown. I'm an associate professor in the Department of OBGYN and a faculty member on our D&I Launchpad here at UW-Madison. And we're really excited to be launching this new seminar, which is, the acronym is DRISS, Dissemination, Research, and Implementation Science Seminar. Please mark your calendar. It is the second Friday of the month at noon. It's a virtual seminar. You can log in from wherever you are, eat your lunch, and listen to what folks are doing in our community around issues related to dissemination and implementation. We encourage collaboration. We also encourage and welcome feedback. We will be placing a link to an evaluation survey in the chat. We will also be emailing everybody a link to that evaluation survey, and I'm just stressing the importance of feedback. We really do, we read those, we pay attention, we're sort of data geeks, and we revise based on what we hear from folks in attendance. So really excited to launch the inaugural DRISS seminar today with a fabulous guest speaker from Michigan, Danny Elmerall. And Danny is here visiting with Andrew Quanbeck, who's another member of our faculty on the D&I Launchpad. So Andy is going to go ahead and introduce Danny. And then Danny will talk for about 35 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat at any point. We'll make sure to leave plenty of time for robust discussion. That's kind of one of the goals of the seminar. So thank you so much for being here. Andy, you want to introduce Danny?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited to have Danny here today. Danny and our team spent the whole day meeting yesterday discussing the project that we're currently collaborating on, and first got to know Danny back in 2015. I attended a workshop that he was giving on adaptive interventions, and at that time we were in the R34 stage of a project on opioid prescribing and adoption of clinical guidelines for opioid prescribing. And listening to Danny and Amy Kilborn talking at the Society for Implementation Research Collaboration Conference back then really sparked a lot of ideas for me. I'll always remember, like, oh, we have to be doing an adaptive intervention in the SMART trial and our subsequent research. And we're fortunate to get that R01 funded, and it's been a real pleasure working with Danny, and has brought a lot of innovation and I think efficiency to the work that we're doing. So I'm a huge fan of Danny and his work. I think it's really encouraging to see that his work is really taking off and innovating in implementation research and seeing a lot more of it. And I think it just, my background's in systems engineering, and the types of concepts that underlie this, the whole idea behind adaptive implementation strategies really makes a ton of sense to me from an systems engineering perspective. So I'm excited to hear Danny's latest thinking. I know we're going to hear some results from a new study, which will be very exciting for me. I'm going to be looking forward to learning a lot. And so with that, I'll just give a quick introduction. Danny Elmerall is an associate professor and the co-director of data science for Dynamic Intervention Decision Making Center, or the D3C. He's at the Department of Statistics, College of Literature, Sciences and the Arts Survey Research Center at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. So with that, Danny, take it away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Andy. Thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Felice. Thanks, Alice and Nick and everyone for making this a reality. I'm really happy to be here. Okay, I'm going to start my 35 minutes so I can keep an eye on it. All right, let's get right to it. So I don't do any of this research by myself. Here's a snapshot of some people I work with. There's Billy, Susan, and Linda. We are the directors of a NIDA Center of Excellence. It's a P50 we're barely finishing year one. Some of the work I'll speak about at the tail end of this is new work I'm doing under the auspices of this P50. All right, and don't worry, I don't have 139 slides like you see at the bottom right there. And I'll just zip through it. My slides are very modular, and I know where to skip. So here's what the full talk would look like. I want to make sure you learn what an adaptive implementation strategy is. I may or may not get to what it means to optimize, or I'll flash right through it. And then I really want you to learn the third one, which is what's a clustered smart. And then I want to give you three examples of clustered smarts, just so you have a sense of the variety. And if I'm lucky, I'll get to this idea of a MAISY, which is the thing I'm working on right now, and I've only started scratching the surface on it. And that'll be my example 3 if I get to it, okay? All right. So all of you guys know that what works is not actually what gets implemented in practice, right? That's the foundational thought in implementation science, right? And so we want to close that research to practice gap. And the other thing that you guys already know is that sometimes when you're trying to implement an evidence-based practice, it might require sequential organization-specific approach, because one of your practices or clinics or sites might respond well and adopt early, but another one might not, and you might need to adapt your implementation strategy to suit the needs of that site. That's nothing more than what I call an adaptive implementation strategy. That's all it is. It's just a guide for an implementer to intervene in this way. Okay, that's it. And it's because we don't think one size fits all. That's the bottom line. So what is an example of an adaptive implementation strategy? Here's one. Okay, this is in the context of trying to get CBT adopted in high schools across Michigan. Later on, I'll give you a different, more medical example. And here we start off with some in-person training. Most implementation strategies start with training, right? They kick off like that. And then this is a very expensive intervention component. Starting at month 2, we send a coach out to the high school. And this actually happened. We actually drove a coach out to the high school, and the high schools were like 100 and something of them across the state of Michigan, and they started coaching. And coaching, of course, is an implementation strategy that resolves skills deficits. That's the main idea of coaching, is to put some skills into your brain. But what if at month 4, which is right after the holiday break, you know, this is a school setup, right? Right after the holiday break, we discover that the school professionals, that's what an SP is, we asked the question, has each school professional at the school delivered 3 or more CBT sessions to greater than 10 students? And if the answer is no, is yes, we think the school's doing pretty good. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So we continue with coaching. But if the school is no, we feel like this is a school that's in need of more care, more implementation. So we augment with a facilitation intervention. Facilitation is a totally different implementation intervention. It's not about skills. It's about knocking down barriers, facilitating your ability to do the CBT. So these are 2 different interventions at 2 different time points. And you should know the rationale for this adaptive implementation strategy was that in the school setting, it didn't make sense to consider facilitation as a first-line strategy. That's not always the case in medicine, but in the school setting it was. And we went round and round about that. And that's why it's considered a second-line strategy and only for people that are struggling. Okay, that's an example of an adaptive implementation strategy. It's actually a pretty simple one. It's only got 3 stages, but it's only got one part that's adaptive toward the tail end. So now you know what an adaptive implementation strategy. So let me tell you a little bit more about it. An adaptive implementation strategy is not a research method. Okay? It's not an experimental design. It's not an adaptive trial design. It's not a pilot study. And it's not an approach to rapid cycle research. It has nothing to do with research. The thing I just showed you, okay, this example I just showed you is something an implementer would do to a school. Or it's a guide for what an implementer would do across the schools in the state of Michigan. So at this point, I have not talked about research at all. This is a very important concept because later I will talk about research. I use the word adaptive, which gets very confused because there's another word called adaptation that gets used a lot in implementation science. I'm here to tell you I don't mean that version of adaptation. So for those of you who view adaptation as a research tool, where imagine a world where the scientist does not exist, right? My version of adaptive has nothing to do with research. It's what the implementer is doing to the schools. Okay, that's important, okay? And for those of you that view adaptation as a possible implementation strategy, because believe it or not, there is confusion in the field about whether that other adaptation is a research tool or a strategy. If you view it that way, then this might be one of the implementation strategies you employ in an adaptive implementation strategy. Okay, I'm just trying to be as clear as possible. So why do we do an adaptive implementation strategy? This is like your significance section of a grant. The implementation strategies that work for one organization don't work for the other. And the strategies that I start using now and that might work in the short run may not work later, and vice versa. Or I might be strategic about sequencing my intervention so that I set up a site for success in the future should they need something very expensive. These are all possible reasons why we might want to use an adaptive approach to implementation. Oh, and of course, we're always in the resource or cost constraint setting in implementation science because if we were rich, we would just throw as much money as possible at all these clinics and sites and they would adopt the evidence-based practice, maybe. But we're always, so sometimes what we do with adaptive implementation is we hold out very expensive strategies only for the sites that need it later. That's another rationale. They're all related. Okay, I'm gonna skip what it means to optimize. And I'll come back to it if I have time, because I really want to get through the new stuff. So some questions that Amy Kilborn and I had about the adaptive implementation strategy we showed you earlier was, well, what's the effect of offering versus not offering coaching? Because coaching is actually pretty expensive. And maybe we can have a situation where we don't do any coaching and we only add facilitation to sites that need it at the second stage. That's a big question for us. Another one was, which are the schools that benefit most from coaching and which are the non-responding schools that benefit most from facilitation? So these are these very exciting questions that the implementers really wanted to know the answer to. I consider these optimization questions. And this is the kicker. If we're able to sit around the room and learn and know the answer to these questions, like if Andy says, oh, Danny, I know exactly who needs facilitation, I know exactly who needs coaching, then you do not need to listen to the rest of this talk. The rest of this talk is for people, scientists, to have these questions and they want to know the answer and they want to answer it rigorously through a trial design. That's what we're talking about today. So I am now just starting to talk about research for the first time. I just now posed my very first research questions today. You guys see that? And it's all about making that adaptive implementation strategy better. So a clustered SMART is nothing more than a tool, a research tool that you might use as a researcher to come up with a really good adaptive implementation strategy, which is not for a researcher. Okay, all right, that's what a SMART is. And the best way to teach SMARTs, honestly, I can put as many words as I want up there, is just to show you an example. So let me show you the ASIC study, which is the study that is about that very first implementation strategy I just showed you, okay? And I'm doing pretty good on time so far. Got 26 minutes left. This is terrific. So I'm about to slow down. And are we doing questions throughout or at the end? At the end. Yeah.
At the end, but if people have it, I can monitor chat.
Perfect. Okay, so let me show you an example of a SMART. And by the way, the express purpose of a SMART is to develop a very good adaptive implementation strategy. So what's the goal? The goal is when we're done with this study, we walk away on the other side at the end of the 5-year R01 with a really good adaptive implementation strategy in our hands that we say, let's roll this baby out, okay? All right, so here's the ASIC study. Remember, these are schools in the state of Michigan. And also, I didn't tell you, I don't know about Wisconsin, in the state of Michigan, most mental health school professionals at high schools in the state of Michigan, of which there are between 1 and 3. Every high school in Michigan has between 1 and 3 school mental health professionals. Got it? Almost all of them are not using evidence-based practices. Mind blowing. Okay, so that was the big thing about this study is we want to put, and what we did is we wanted to put CBT in there because CBT is one of those therapies that is actually quite modular and useful for all sorts of disorders, you name it. And so this is what this study is about. How do we put CBT into these schools? So we took 100 schools, we recruited 100 schools. So on average, 200 school professionals, but anywhere between 100 and 300. All right, and the very first randomization, we randomized the schools to whether or not you get coaching. Rep is like a basic level intervention all the schools get. That's like, think of it as your training. That's just the fancy way of saying training and showing them what CBT is, but not coaching them. But what we randomize to is whether or not we coach, because that's a very expensive implementation strategy. You have to drive out to the school and coach them and watch them do CBT in a group setting and then give them feedback to these school professionals. So very expensive, very time consuming. And then right after the holiday break, we examine whether a school is suboptimally responding. And we had prior data to shed light on how that's defined. And it was defined as greater than one school professional delivering fewer than 3 components to fewer than 10 students. And if you ask us, well, how did we come up with all that? It turns out that that is a super low bar across the state of Michigan for the kinds of therapy we should be using on the students at high schools, okay? And so we set the bar very low, all right? And if you meet that bar, then we call you a responding school and you stay the course. So if you got rep initially, you continue rep. But if you got coaching initially in rep, you continue coaching in rep. But if you triggered you're a suboptimally responding school, we re-randomized you to whether or not you get facilitation. See, do I add facilitation or do I not? Do I add facilitation or do I not? Do you guys see that? And that's pretty cool, because that's something we call a sequentially randomized trial, or SMART, where I have a first randomization for a first line strategy and a second randomization for a second line strategy. It just so happens that the way this study was designed, facilitation was only being held out for suboptimally responding schools, because we felt like, based on our prior data, if you met this criteria, which is a low bar, you were going to be pretty good. And we didn't even consider adding facilitation. So that you can think of that as a known factor. The study is not evaluating that cutoff. The study presumes to already know that. All we're evaluating is, do I start with coaching or not? And for schools suboptimally responding, do I need facilitation or not? You got it? We're good? Now you might be wondering, in a study like this, Danny, this looks complicated. What would be the study's primary aim? As you guys know, every randomized trial has to have a primary aim and then a bunch of other stuff we look at, right? And the primary aim reigns supreme, because that's the thing that we tell the world. We are going to power the study for this primary aim. We're going to choose the sample size for this primary aim. And this is what I hope to learn at minimum from this trial. That's what a primary aim is, really. So what was this study's primary aim? The study's primary aim, actually, you guys are going to love this, was the comparison of that first intervention I showed you at the beginning, that first adaptive implementation strategy I showed you, where I add coaching and I add facilitation for struggling sites, versus never adding coaching and never adding facilitation. Think of that as a just do the training and cross your fingers intervention. Okay, so rep actually is a little bit more than cross your fingers. The school professionals are told that they can call the rep facility for any support they want to doing their CBT at any time they want. So that's a great strategy that we would be able to roll out, right? Because then school professionals can just call me whenever they want, right? And I'm going to help them. But it's not this coaching intensive intervention, and it's not this facilitation intensive intervention, which is the other way. Facilitation is proactive, where the facilitator checks in on the school professional in a proactive way. Rep is just like hands off. It's what we call a pull intervention, because the school has to pull it rather than a push intervention like coaching and facilitation. You guys got it? So you're probably scratching your head and saying, wait, Danny, wait, what's happening here? Your primary aim is just this whole package versus this one? Yeah, that's what it is. Notice how simple that is, right? And what we did is we chose the most intensive, costly adaptive implementation strategy versus the least costly one, which is not even adaptive. And if you go back to the design, you'll realize how this comes about. It's actually, the primary comparison is the blue strategy. Do you guys see that? The blue strategy says, regardless of my response status, I just do rep. That's what it is. Versus the pink one, which is I do coaching, and if you're not struggling, I do facilitation, and if you're doing well, I stay in the course. You guys see that? But notice there's these other white ones that are not part of the primary aim. That's fine. They're part of the secondary aim because later on in secondary analysis, we wanted to know among the suboptimally responding schools who got or didn't get coaching, which of those need facilitation and how do we characterize those who need facilitation? But that's secondary aim. But do you see how both of these questions are about helping me come up with a really good adaptive implementation strategy? That's the goal of a SMART. Okay, I got 20 minutes left and we're doing pretty good on time. Okay, so for the first time ever, I'm showing you guys the results of this study. This was just published 2 weeks ago. I encourage you to go read the paper so you can learn more because I only show you one slide here on the results, but let me show you what happened. By the way, before I show you what happened, do you all see that this study has embedded within it 4 implementation strategies? You ready? Let me just review what they are because I don't have a slide on it. Number 1 is the blue one, the expensive one. Sorry, the cheap one, the least expensive one, because it's no coaching, no facilitation. On the other end is the most expensive one, which is the pink one, right? I do coaching, I do facilitation, but then there's 2 in the middle. There's the one where I don't do coaching, but I do facilitation. You guys see that? And then there's the other one in the middle where I do coaching, but I don't do facilitation. So one I don't do coaching and do facilitation, and one I don't do coaching and I do facilitation. You guys got it? Yeah, there's 4 adaptive. And actually, if you think about it, only 2 of them are adaptive because this other one here, this one right here, the ones that end in rep and coaching, that's not adaptive either. That just says do coaching and regardless of your suboptimal response, just continue doing coaching. So in this study, I have 2 non-adaptive implementation strategies and 2 adaptive implementation strategies. Do you guys see that? It's subtle, but super important.
This is your audience. I just wanted you to have it.
Oh, that's awesome. Look at my awesome audience. All right. Okay, so here are the results. And I had to tell you there were 4 because I'm showing you 4 curves. This is so cool, you guys. So check this out. The blue curve. Oh, what's my outcome? I never told you guys what my outcome was. This study's primary outcome was the average total CBT delivered. Okay, and we chopped up time into these phases. So we just and each phase is roughly 3 months-ish. And so we added up all the CBT delivered in that phase, and then we summed it up, and that would be the 4 outcomes you see here, okay? And just so you are able to orient yourself a little bit, right after the end of phase 1, the end of it, so to the left of where it says phase 1 is where I decided to add facilitation or not. And before that was when I decided to add coaching or not. So when you see the phase 1, you see these 2 dots, right? At phase 1, that's the effectiveness of coaching versus no coaching.
Okay.
So the very first thing I want you to realize is coaching is in green. Coaching did not do as good as no coaching, which is a bit of a shocker to everyone in our team. And also oh man, that's kind of nice because it's so expensive. So on average, so I just want to be really clear, right? I don't want anyone to sort of go on the New York Times and say, Danny says coaching doesn't matter. No. On average, coaching does not appear to be better than facilitation. Facilitation appears to be marginally better right before I transition to the second stage. But has nothing to do with adaptive interventions. Let's look at further outcomes down the line to really get excited about this. So if you look at the top blue line and you look at the line that did the best, that's the adaptive intervention that got facilitation. So let me just repeat what the blue line is. You guys ready? The blue line are all of the schools that did not get coaching and for whom facilitation was considered if they were a suboptimally responding school, and for whom you did not get facilitation if you were responding. So there's 2 types of schools inside the blue line. There's the responding schools that stayed the course without coaching. They just kept getting rep. And there's the non-responding schools that got facilitation. All right, you guys got it? That's the blue line. You guys following me? Yeah? So that was the one, that was not the adaptive intervention we thought was going to do best. The adaptive intervention we thought was going to do best was this dark green one that kind of landed somewhere in the middle. The dark green one that was the second best at phase 3, which was the full expensive, I do coaching, I do facilitation. So this is an interesting story because it keeps rearing its head in effectiveness research. It keeps rearing its head in implementation science, which is this story that it's not always the case that more is better.
Yes.
We talked about it at dinner last night, and this just keeps rearing its head, and it's kind of cool actually, because adaptive implementation strategies, in a sense, are acknowledging that more is not always better and trying to help guide implementers when is more better. It turns out that at this point in our analysis, we know that adding facilitation to schools that didn't get coaching is better. Now, it could still be, you guys, that I have schools up here that got coaching. I want to be very clear, and I'm pointing above the blue line, okay? These are averages. So we still haven't finished the analysis of this trial where we're trying to find the schools that really benefit from coaching. We may indeed find that some schools, based on what we know about them at entry, really do need coaching, and we think we will find that. But that analysis is not done. Are you guys understanding what I'm saying? So this is an average effect right now. Okay. Okay, so that's the story. The story here was the best strategy in the study happened to be adaptive. That's the first thing, that's cool. The best, remember there's 2 adaptive and 2 non-adaptive, right? Because there was one implementation strategy, which is just always do rep. There was another implementation strategy, which was always do coaching. Neither one of those are adaptive. And then there were 2 other ones that brought in facilitation for non-responders, one that had coaching and one that didn't. The best adaptive implementation strategy was the one, on average, was the one that did not do coaching, but added facilitation. And the least best, you know, the light blue line down there was just do coaching. This is showing you the power of facilitation, I think. I think that's what this might be showing us. Okay, I'm excited to share that because I had never shared that before. It is published, so it's not a secret. All right, let me move on. I have 12 minutes left, and I'm gonna try to get to what I wanted to get to today, because well, this is one thing I wanted to get to was show you some new results. I had never done that before. And then the next thing I want to get to is this MAISY idea. So let me show you a study that I helped design with Andy Quambeck, who's here with us today. So this is a Wisconsin study for you guys on the phone. All right, super exciting. This is about improving opioid prescribing or guideline concordant opioid prescribing in primary care. And here's the design. It's actually the complete flip of the study you just saw. The very first randomization, so these are primary care clinics across 2 systems, Bellin Health and UW. And the very first randomization was, do we do practice facilitation or not? It turns out that high schools and clinics are wildly different. We don't go around coaching clinicians right out of the gates. We hold off on coaching until necessary. All right? Not the case with school professionals, but with clinicians it is. And so in this study, after going round and round for 6 months with Andy, we realized that we're like, wait, coaching can't be a first-line strategy in clinics. Not going to happen. So instead here, the clinics are randomized to whether or not we need facilitation. And actually, the facilitation in this study feels and looks a little different than the facilitation we did in the schools anyway. Okay, even though it's the same overarching concept. And then at month 6, actually, that might be month 9. I think we changed it after we published this. At month 6, but before we enrolled any schools, at month 6, we re-randomize all clinics to get coaching or not. PPC is just physician peer coaching or physician peer consulting. Yeah, you don't want to call it coaching when you're talking to a clinician, so you call it physician peer consulting, but even that might have some trouble, so we got to work on our language here. So notice what's way different about this study. The second randomization is not among suboptimally responding schools. That's the first thing I need you to realize. You guys see that? Every clinic got randomized, not just the suboptimally responding clinics. Why do you all think that is? That's because, unlike the other study, when this study was launched, we don't yet know who are the clinics that need physician peer consulting, or more importantly, we don't yet know which clinics ought not be considered for physician peer coaching like we did in the other study. In the other study, we came to that study knowing these schools ought not even be considered for that second stage strategy, but that wasn't the case. And Andy and I and the team, trust me, we went round and round because I wanted to embed a tailoring variable in this study, but the science didn't demand it, so we didn't. So here, this is a smart. This is a smart. This is about developing an adaptive implementation strategy, but you can't see it on this screen because even though our goal is to develop an adaptive implementation strategy, we don't yet know what the tailoring variables ought to be that go into it. So the study is going to help us because we are going to discover, hopefully the studies help us, right? We're going to cross our fingers because the study may not, but hopefully it helps us understand who are the clinics here that need facilitation. And hopefully it's going to help us decide who are the suboptimal responding schools or clinics that need physician peer consulting. You guys got that? So we are going to go into the data and answer those questions, but that's not even a primary question. Our primary question was much simpler. Our primary question was, does the most expensive flagship intervention, the one where I do facilitation and I do coaching, so cell B, is that one better than not doing coaching, not doing facilitation, which is cell C? So there, you can see that the design is our design, right? Because you can see parallels between what we did with Amy's study and parallels with this one. It's just a slightly different design because of the nature of our science, right? I have 7 minutes left, and I hope you guys can appreciate that. Hopefully right now you've learned a lot by now. Hopefully you've learned what an adaptive implementation strategy is. You've learned what a SMART is, and you kind of are starting to learn what are some design principles that go into thinking of how do I even come up with the SMART?
Can I just ask you a clarification question?
Yeah.
What was the sample size number of clinics for this study?
For this study, Andy, it's 43 or something?
I think it's 34.
34. And the primary outcome is not at the clinic level. The primary outcome is at the prescriber level. That's why it's a clustered SMART. So we're randomizing clinics, but we powered for and we hope to get at least 256 prescribers because each of these clinics have kind of 6 to 7 prescribers. So if you're thinking clinics sample size that was randomized, only in the 30s and 40s. If you're thinking the sample size for analysis, where the outcome is, it's at the prescriber level. So we're looking at 256. Okay. Now, yes, if you're thinking, man, that's not a lot of clinics you're randomizing, the answer is yes. We're on the very bottom end here of what's possible for the kinds of effect sizes we were targeting, and which I think were moderate or small to moderate. You really can't afford to, for that kind of effect size, you really can't afford to go any smaller than this. This was right on the edge of like small, but we did it. And we are currently analyzing the data and we don't have any results to share. And Andy will, I'm sure, tell you what those are when we get them. Okay. We're in the throes of analyzing the data. The primary outcome in this study was the amount of morphine medication equivalent dosage being prescribed by prescribers was the primary outcome. Of course, we have other more interesting outcomes too, such as on average, what proportion of prescriptions went above the 90 milligram cutoff, which is a fancy, it's like a cutoff that's being debated heavily, but we have other outcomes in mind too. Okay, so I have exactly 5 minutes to talk about the third thing, which is my new thing, MAISYs. Oh, and I anticipated your question. So I'm just gonna barrel right through this.
Thanks.
I'm not gonna tell you guys how I calculated it. That's more mathy, but I have the formulas if you guys ever want to know. Okay, so what's on the leading edge of methods for adaptive implementation strategies? What have I been doing lately? So what I've been doing lately, and this actually came about because of my collaboration with Andy Kwambek. You guys should know that. So the new direction I hope to go for the next 5 to 10 years, this thing I'm about to show you in 5 minutes, is because of my collaboration with Andy. Let me show you why. Early on in our study, we actually didn't conceptualize physician peer coaching as a clinic level intervention. And this came up at dinner last night. We actually conceptualized that as a clinician level intervention. And had my dreams come true, okay, the study would have been one that would have been so novel, we wouldn't even have had a way to analyze the data, which was we would first be randomizing at the clinic level to whether or not the clinic gets facilitation, and then randomizing at the prescriber within clinic, whether or not they get coaching, because the questions would have been different. The questions would have been, which clinics need facilitation up front and which prescribers need coaching? Now that didn't fly. After, I think, 3 months, we were thinking that coaching was clinician level for prescriber level for like 3 good months. And we thought we were hanging our hats on the study. And then we had somebody come in, Lynn Madden, who is a beautiful thinker and a real pragmatic one. She says, well, you guys, there's no way in the world you're ever going to have an implementation strategy where you're operationalizing decisions about which prescribers get it or not. It's just not even feasible. It's not going to fly. You have to offer coaching to all the prescribers in the clinic or not at all. This is like 3 months of work when somebody walked into the room and they were like, oh my goodness, we went back to the drawing board. Luckily, we ended up with the study you saw, which randomized clinics to coaching, and that was fine. So we basically reconceptualized coaching to be a clinic level strategy. But just keep in mind for the moment, wishful thinking, this is all hypothetical. For the moment, pretend it would have been a prescriber level intervention. Well, this is what a MAISY is. It's just like an adaptive implementation strategy, but now it's got an M in front, multi-level, because now it's adaptive because I'm only taking the prescribers that are struggling and giving them coaching. All right, so it's adaptive, but it's adaptive at 2 levels. First, I give a clinic level facilitation, and then later on, I adapt to the prescriber within clinic. You guys see that? So I call that a MAISY, a multi-level adaptive implementation strategy. So I went on after this happened. I have 2 minutes left. This is great. After this happened, I went on to think about these methods more deeply. And that's where I'm doing now for the next 5 years. I'm developing methods for MAISYs, which means I'm going to have to develop smarts for MAISYs, which I'm going to call my smarts, or multi-level implementation smarts. So now let's imagine, what would the Balanced Opioid Initiative study have had looked like had it been an MI smart? Well, we would have randomized clinics to facilitation or not, and then we would have randomized. By the way, I keep using the word prescriber, clinician, and practitioner all interchangeably. I know that's very frustrating, but that's what I've been doing. And then we would have randomized practitioners who are later adopters. By the way, language matters here a lot. Language matters a lot in this world. You know, I don't see a future, if we ever do go down this path, I don't see a future where we're ever going to be talking about suboptimal clinicians. Not going to happen. But we might see a future where we're talking about clinicians who are later versus early adopters and who we're helping along, right? Perhaps. And by the way, when you guys hear me talk about MAISYs, it's not always clinic and then prescriber. It could be, as in Ed Portillo's case, the hub leader versus the clinics in the hub. Okay, so I just want to be really crystal clear here that Danny is not saying MAISYs are all about clinics and prescribers. That's not what I'm saying, because I know that's got a whole host of feasibility issues. But this is what a smart would have looked like. Okay, I have 1 minute left and my last slide. And maybe I'll go over by just 1 more minute. In this last slide, I wanted to show you guys my thinking. Like, if I'm ever going to get MAISYs and MI smarts adopted, I have to come up with some working principles for scientific questions people like Heidi and Andy and Nick are interested in answering, right? And so on the far right are the questions. So for example, suppose you really wanted to learn how to best begin a MAISY. Well, we know how to do that one already. That's what's the effect of starting with facilitation versus not. Okay, great. You guys already seen that. The second question is addressing continued barriers or challenges, which you guys have already seen that. If I see a struggling practitioner, what's the effect of adding coaching versus not? The third question is also very interesting. It's called enhancing synergy. I'm almost done, y'all. Enhancing synergy. So maybe there's these positive interaction effects that can happen between what I do first and what I do later. So as an intervention designer, you want to think about that. You want your practice facilitation to be the kind of thing that sets us up for the coaching to be successful should we tap a prescriber on the shoulder and say, hey, I want to help you prescribe better. Well, we got to be thinking of in our science, how do we set that up? And when you're thinking about what to randomize up front, you might be randomizing to strategies that help you smooth the transition to going to coaching later. That's what I call enhancing the synergistic, the interactions between what I do now and what I do later. And let me fast forward to number 7, which I think is fascinating. And I'm still wrapping my head around it. A lot of people, they get scared of spillover effects. And I do not have that attitude. In fact, my attitude is I want to actually make really positive, beneficial spillover effects. So what can we do at the first stage, right? That enhances the ability that when I intervene on Jane, clinician Jane, who was struggling with coaching, that intervention spills over from Jane to all of her fellow practitioners. I actually want a positive spillover effect. And so I think what's cool about thinking multi-level is you can set up the context of a clinic in such a way up front using a strategy, right? I can change the context of a clinic so that I enhance the chances that my spillover effects actually go in the right direction. How beautiful is that? And I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I've only been thinking about this for a few months. And so this is kind of the work that us statisticians and methodologists do. When we have a new tool we want you guys to adopt, we're thinking through the kinds of questions you can answer and ask and answer, and the principles and considerations in the development of a MAISY. Okay, my time is up. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Yeah. So I will start with a question while I'm pulling up the chat.
Yeah.
But it strikes me that that concept of the spillover, the positive spillover effect,
Yeah.
is not dissimilar from when we think about clinic interventions and we think about a provider champion.
Yeah.
And we're intervening on that provider champion.
Yeah.
And like expecting that to, you know, have some positive impact on their peers. So is that just would you call that a variation on an existing implementation strategy, that harnessing positive spillover?
I think so. I think some really smart thinkers in the implementation science space have realized that some of their strategies could have positive spillover, and they could be engineered to have positive spillover. What hasn't been done yet, to my knowledge, is studies that explicitly make that a scientific question that they want to figure out. In other words, what can I do to enhance the positive spillover? So let me give you yet another example. Suppose I have a budget, okay, a budget for the amount of coaching I can give. And imagine if my budgets, I have 2 different kinds of budgets, okay? One is I have enough money to intervene on 50% of the prescribers in a clinic, okay? Or let's say 40%. Or I have another budget on I can intervene with coaching on 60% of the prescribers. Chances are that when you prescribe on more prescribers, you're going to enhance spillover, right? Because I'm inserting that thing into more of the prescribers. But our scientific questions can actually be, should I have a 40% budget or a 60% budget? But no one's asking questions like that, but we will be able to. And that decision of should I have a 40% budget or 60% budget is clinic specific. So that's not a prescriber level. That gets randomized up front. Isn't that wildly cool? So one of your randomizations could be am I going to put clinics in the bucket where I'm going to go inside with 60%? Or am I going to go into clinics? Am I only going to limit myself to 40? That is a strategy in and of itself. That budget is a strategy and one that comes with a cost. But do you see what I'm saying? Like, this opens up the door to some cool questions that I think you guys are going to want to answer. So what I'm doing now is trying to think of what all those questions could be, you know, to get you guys excited to do a study like that.
There are a lot of questions in the chat here. I'm going to start with one from Jane Mahoney because it's on the same concept of positive spillover, and similar to positive effects and positive spillover, are you able to look at negative effects and negative spillover?
Right. If you design the study in a certain way, you'll be able to discover whether the thing you thought was going to get you positive spillover backfires. Because I would be randomizing people to, this is one thing I hope to get positive spillover, and here's another one, and you'll discover, did I get a negative spillover? So yes, there will be a way to answer that. That in fact is the goal. In other words, let me say it differently. The goal is going to be, which are the clinics that I have to do X to get positive spillover, and which are the clinics where I should avoid doing X to avoid getting negative spillover? Yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes, James. We hope to be there someday, Jane.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, the coaching, facilitation, they could have different levels of burden. And your idea of spillover could really sort of turn out that a high burden intervention could spill over to sour sort of people's motivation.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly what I thought, Jane, when he was talking about coaching in the schools.
Yeah.
I wonder if that additional burden actually fought against uptake, gave a negative, like, oh, I have to do this extra time. That makes me even less likely to do the thing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. By the way, can we save the chat? I know it disappears when Zoom is over, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to read them all and learn from these questions. So I want to save it.
We absolutely are saving the chat, and we're recording the whole thing as well. There's another question about adding an economic element or a cost component to the adaptive implementation strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. Both. I have to choose what I give talks on, right, in 35 minutes. So both the ASIC study with Kilborn and the BOY study with Andy Kwambek, both of them have cost effectiveness and components to them. So those are questions we are going to be examining. So like, for example, it might be that one of the adaptive implementation strategies is costlier, but we got to look at the cost effectiveness, right? And they could go against each other. So absolutely, yes, we bake those in for sure.
And then how would you go about specifying the mechanisms of action in the case of a MAISY?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in a MAISY, the mechanisms are very interesting, because think about it, okay? There's different mechanisms at different time points by design. So for example, in the ASIC study, the primary mechanism you're hoping to target is skills, enhancing the skills, because coaching was at first. But the main mechanism you were targeting at the second stage with facilitation wasn't skills necessarily. It was, am I undoing the barriers that this school professional is experiencing? So the short answer is, that's how you would specify them. And in fact, it's the other way around, Patricia Maritim. It's, we lay out all the mechanisms, and then we realize, oh, coaching has to come first. You know what I mean? So in fact, a good story about mechanisms is not necessary to design a MAISY, but it's very useful, because it would help me identify the tailoring variables and what comes later and what comes before. You know what I mean? Another way to think about mechanisms is what these guys call determinants. You could think of them as, right? Yeah, because that's kind of what's happening, right? Facilitation is addressing different determinants than coaching, right? Pretty cool. It's pretty cool stuff.
And this is tying in really nicely to a question at the bottom of the chat. Can you talk more about the science that went in at the beginning that indicated what the adaptive target should be? For example, in your first example.
Like in the ASIC study?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, this is great. So what happened there is we had prior data from a prior study where we had done some coaching, okay? And so it wasn't a trial. It was just like, I am following these schools and the school professionals to see how they're doing with coaching. And what we discovered, Madeline, what we discovered is that right around after the holiday break, okay, we discovered that there was a whole cadre of schools that from that point on, they did pretty well. but a whole other cadre of schools that their prognosis wasn't so good if they met these metrics. So it was like a ROC analysis where we were trying to find the right cutoff that helped us shed light on who are the schools after coaching that defined, categorized, and identified in a certain way will do well, and the other ones are not going to do so well. That shed light on, and we felt that those results were so strong that we were like, we're running with this baby. These are the schools that are responding according to this thing. We're not even going to bother offering them facilitation. And we that's exactly what we did. But the schools that trigger they're not doing so hot at the month 4 and they're not going to do so hot later, they're going to get worse. We said, these are the ones we want to know whether we need to add facilitation. So that, Madeline, I hope that's a long way of answering your question.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, and every analyst you're friends with knows how to do these little ROC analysis. You know, this is not hard stuff, right? This is like you go into your data and you try to, you think about the mechanisms and the prognostic variables of impending doom, and then you try to figure out where should the cutoffs go, and you know what I mean? And that along with your expertise, you put those two together and you might come up with something good. Yeah.
And then there's a question from Yao Lu about, were all the participating clinics from the same health system? If not, how do you account in analyzing your results for correlations between clinics within the same health system due to health system level policies, tools, et cetera?
Oh, right. Our randomization here was at the clinic level. So I can reframe that question to the clinic level, right? Because there's a clustering, right? That clinic has a culture and a way of doing things, and all the prescribers might respond similarly. So this is the classic thing in statistics where we account for the clustering at the clinic level. And we could do the same thing at both the system level, right? We don't have to actually. It turns out you don't have to do it that way, but we could, for example, adjust for a covariate that says, maybe we'll discover that different strategies work better at Bellin than they do at Wisconsin because of the differences in the systems. So we could investigate those things, but don't worry, whoever asked this question, we are accounting for the clustering of prescribers within clinics, which is something we must do. We can't get away with not doing that. Does that help answer the question? I hope it does.
Yeah, it's just similar in our work. We just found that there was significant spillover at the health system level. And part of the reason why it became more difficult to run our study was because we realized that the changes we were making were really systems level changes. And so, having clinics within, originally we had decided to, we were planning on, randomizing clinics within the same health system. But what we found in our pilot study was that there was so much spillover, even though we were only working with one out of these 5 clinics in a small rural health system, there was benefit across all of the clinics. And
Right.
So because they were making systems level changes at the level of the health system and changing their infrastructure and how they do things and sharing best practices, which is an example of this positive spillover concept that was discussed earlier. And so that's sort of what pushed us to ultimately in our current study be randomizing at the health system level so that we're only working with 1 or 2 clinics within a particular health system because of that particular issue, that there's so much spillover that it's not really, it would be more difficult to analyze the results because you don't really have independence
Right.
across the clinics. So I think this kind of just addresses the general, one of the criticisms of this particular type of study design is, even though it's really innovative and really cool and very pragmatic, analysis of the outcomes and how you tease out these issues becomes more difficult than your traditional RCT. So I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts about just analyzing data, because as these adaptations and changes become more complex, all these different tiers, how do you analyze data and your outcomes when it's gotten so complicated and divided so many ways? And a lot of times we don't have the sample size that can address those things. And then just as an aside, I just want to give a shout out to the Survey Research Center at the Institute of Social Research in Ann Arbor. I actually that was one of my first experiences with sociology. I was in one of the first years of Take Your Daughter to Work Day at ISR. So just wanted
Cool.
to give a shout out there.
That's great. I think you're totally right. And today I didn't offer any tools for analysis. I wanted to talk design, but you are totally right. These spillover and clustering effects do get a little hairier in the analysis, but I have complete confidence that we'll be able to develop some tools that would be easily used by analysts, clinicians, biostatisticians that are part of these important teams. And so I just didn't present on any of that today. And just one more thing on that comment, because I love this so much. There is a history of multi-level trials in actually, believe it or not, in the infectious disease world. Because in the early days, they asked these really cool questions like, what % of the population do we need to go inoculate? And so they actually have trials where they randomize communities, like community A through D, to I'm going to only inoculate 40% of them, and communities J through Z, I'm going to inoculate 60% of them, and where they are tackling the question of spillover, you know, explicitly. And so there are some tools available. They do need to be extended to the analysis of SMART, and that's what I'm doing in my free time right now is shoring up those methods so that they're usable. We're not quite there yet, but I think I'm getting closer.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I think a lot of us are a little daunted by trying to find a statistician who, you know, would feel comfortable doing these types of analysis.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Yeah. One of the things my center prides itself in, and I hope you guys get, oh yeah, it's almost time. One of the things my center prides itself in, and I've made a career out of, is when I develop these new methods, I work really hard to put them into the hands of scientists and make it as easy as possible for the PIs and their analysts. And I'll continue trying to do that, and hopefully we can overcome some of the barriers you're mentioning.
I think we have time for, if anybody has a last burning question, you can put it into the chat. We are also at this point going to put into the chat the link to the evaluation survey. Please fill out the evaluation survey. You will also get an email inviting you to evaluate this inaugural session. I want to say express my gratitude to Danny for coming and sharing this work with us. This is, you know, sort of groundbreaking methodology, and I echo Yao's. Like when we were talking earlier today, I was like, oh, the analysis is giving me palpitations just thinking about this. So making these methods, the analysis methods, accessible to our analysts is a really important part of the multidisciplinary work that we're all doing. And so if there's no more burning questions for right now, we'll conclude by saying thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Professor Almiral, for sharing your wisdom. We're really so fortunate to benefit from the amazing ways in which your brain works.
Thank you. Super fun.
And expanding our science. So thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful weekend, and please fill out your evaluation. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, guys. Super fun.